She showed up in a torn velvet dress in the middle of a blizzard, and he tried to send her right back. He didn't want a wife. He wanted someone who could survive. And this woman, with her pale hands and city shoes already soaked through with snow, looked like she'd be dead before January. But she refused to leave. And that stubbornness, that one desperate, foolish refusal, would drag both of them into something far more dangerous than any mountain winter. Armed men. Hidden secrets. A fortune powerful enough to bury them both. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit like and stay until the end. This one's worth it. The train was 40 minutes late. Cole Barrett stood on the platform with snow collecting on the brim of his hat and ice working its way into the crack between his collar and his neck. And he didn't move. He'd been standing in the same spot for the better part of an hour. He wasn't the kind of man who paced. Pacing was for men who had somewhere else to be. He had nowhere else to be. Around him, Silver Ridge carried on the way it always did in Decembers, desperately and without much grace. A mule cart was stuck in the frozen rut near the feed store. Two men argued loudly outside the saloon about something that probably wasn't worth arguing about. Smoke from a dozen chimneys bent sideways in the wind. Cole watched none of it. He stared down the rail line, jaw tight, hands shoved into the pockets of his canvas coat. He'd made this trip once, and he wasn't planning on making it twice. Whatever came off that train today was what he was working with. That was the deal. He wasn't entirely sure what had possessed him to write the letter in the first place. 6 weeks ago, he'd been sitting at his table after 3 days of near silence in the cabin. Just the wind and the creak of the walls and the sound of his own breathing. And something had shifted in him. Not loneliness, exactly. He wouldn't have called it that. More like the slow, grinding recognition that a man running a homestead alone in the high Rockies was one bad leg injury, one bad storm, one bad season away from being a frozen body nobody found until spring. He needed help. Practical help, that was all. He dictated the letter to the agency through the post office clerk in town, a nervous young man named Gerald, who kept blinking too fast. Cole had been blunt about his requirements. He needed a woman with frontier experience or the willingness to acquire it quickly. Someone with a strong back and enough sense to know that survival in the mountains was not romantic. Someone who understood that what he was offering was shelter, food, protection, and the legal status of marriage. And that was the full extent of what was on the table. The agency had responded with a name, Vivian Mercer, 31 years old, originally from Philadelphia. Experience listed as household management, accounting, and this was the one that had nudged him toward writing back, demonstrated adaptability in challenging circumstances. Whatever that meant. He'd sent the second letter. He'd bought the ticket. He'd waited. And now the train was coming around the mountain bend in a long shriek of steel and steam, and Cole Barrett felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. But the passengers came out the way they always did. Miners, merchants, a few families with too much luggage. Cole scanned them with the detached efficiency of a man assessing traps on a line. Too old. Too young. That one was clearly meeting her husband from the way she was already scanning the platform. That one... He stopped. She was the last one off. She came down the metal steps carefully, one hand gripping the rail so tight her knuckles were probably white beneath her gloves. Except she wasn't wearing gloves. Her hands were bare and already reddening in the cold. She wore a dress that might have been beautiful once, a deep blue velvet with small buttons up the front, but it was torn at the left shoulder seam and the hem was filthy and damp in a way that suggested it had been that way for more than just this trip. Her hair was dark and half loose from whatever arrangement it had started in, and it whipped against her face in the wind, and she didn't push it away. She was too busy looking at Silver Ridge, looking at it like it was the last place on earth she expected to find herself, which, judging by the dress, it probably was. Cole walked forward. "Miss Mercer?" She turned, dark eyes, alert and exhausted at the same time, a bruise along her jaw. Old, going yellow at the edges. But there. Her face was the kind of face that gave away too much when she wasn't guarding it, and right now she wasn't guarding anything. She looked cold and scared and like she'd been holding herself together through sheer stubbornness for longer than was healthy. "Mr. Barrett," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected. "Educated. That Philadelphia accent clipped and clear even through chattering teeth. Cole looked at her for a moment that went on too long. "Where's the rest of it?" he said. "I beg your pardon?" "Your things. Luggage." He glanced behind her at the train steps. A woman traveling cross-country in December generally arrives with more than one bag. She looked down at the worn carpet bag she was holding at her side. Something moved across her face. A decision, made fast. "I travel light," she said. Cole Barrett had spent 16 years in the mountains learning to read things that didn't want to be read. Weather, terrain, animals. People were easier than most. She was lying. Not about her name or who she was. He believed she was Vivian Mercer. She was lying about the bag. There was a story behind that bag being the only thing she had, and it wasn't a good one. He stood there in the blowing snow looking at this woman in her ruined velvet dress and her bare red hands and the old bruise on her jaw, and he felt the full weight of what he'd done by sending that letter. "You're going to freeze," he said. "I'm already freezing," she said. "Are you going to do something about that? Or are we going to stand here while I find out firsthand?" He almost smiled. He didn't. "Come on," he said, and turned toward the general store. And then he bought her a coat. Not out of tenderness, out of practical necessity. A woman who froze to death on the 2-day wagon ride to the homestead was useless to him, and a dead body in his wagon would raise questions he didn't want to answer. He picked the coat the way he picked tools, for function, not appearance. Heavy canvas, fleece-lined, meant for a man but close enough in size. He set it on the counter. Vivian Mercer looked at it, then at him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's not a gift," he said. "I'll dock it from your first month." She put the coat on without another word. The store owner, a wide man named Hatch with a permanent look of mild suspicion, watched them with barely concealed interest. News traveled fast in Silver Ridge, and Cole knew word of the mail-order bride had already circulated. He'd been the subject of enough speculation over the years to be immune to it. He paid for the coat, bought the rest of what he needed, and headed for the door. "Mr. Barrett." He stopped. It was Gerald, the post office clerk, emerging from between two shelves with an ink stain on his finger and that same rapid blinking. He glanced at Vivian with open curiosity. "Everything come together all right?" Gerald asked. "Fine," Cole said. "There's a preacher in town through Saturday," Gerald offered. If the timing..." "I know," Cole said. He walked out. They were married that afternoon in a small church that smelled of candle wax and damp wood. The preacher was a tired man named Brock, who performed the ceremony with the efficiency of someone who'd done it too many times to find meaning in it anymore. There were no other witnesses. The ring Cole produced was a plain iron band he'd had in a box under his bunk for 3 years. He'd traded a beaver pelt for it from a passing fur dealer who'd needed to lighten his load, not because he had any intention of using it, but because he had a habit of trading for things that might be useful eventually. He slid it on her finger. Her hands had warmed up a little from the coat, but they still trembled. Not from cold, he thought, from something else. He didn't ask. They exchanged the necessary words. Brock pronounced them married. Vivian signed the register in a sharp, precise hand that confirmed the accounting background, the kind of writing that was fast and legible and didn't waste movement. Cole signed below her, 2 names on a page that would be filed and forgotten. Outside the church, the snow was picking up. "We need to move," Cole said, walking toward the wagon. "We lose the light. We're sleeping on the trail." "How far?" Vivian asked, keeping pace. 2 days if the pass is clear, 3 if it isn't." She climbed up onto the wagon bench without waiting for help. He noticed that. He took the reins and clicked the horses forward, and Silver Ridge fell away behind them in the gray afternoon, and neither of them said a word for the better part of an hour. It was Vivian who broke the silence. "I want to know the rules," she said. Cole glanced sideways at her. She was sitting straight, both hands in the pockets of the canvas coat, watching the pine trees on either side of the trail. "Rules," he repeated. "Your expectations. What you need me to do. What I'm responsible for. What's off limits." She paused. "I don't like surprises." He thought about that for a moment. "The homestead runs on a cycle," he said. "Hunting, trapping, timber cutting, that's mine. I'm gone sometimes 2 days, sometimes 4, When I'm gone, you maintain the fire, tend the animals, manage the food stores, mend anything that needs mending. The cabin has a list on the wall above the stove. Follow the list. What's on the list? Chores, checks, temperatures to maintain for the root cellar, feed ratios for the stock. He paused. You know how to read numbers? I'm an accountant, she said, and there was a dry edge to it that he wasn't expecting. Was an accountant, he noticed. Past tense. He didn't push. Then you'll manage the food stores, he said. I'll show you the system. It's not complicated if you pay attention. He kept his eyes on the trail. I'll teach you the rifle. Not optional. A beat. All right, she said. You get sick, you tell me. You get injured, you tell me. You're struggling with something, you tell me. I'm not interested in finding out something went wrong 3 days after it went wrong because you didn't want to admit you couldn't handle it. She was quiet for a moment. And what about you? She said. What about me? Same rules apply to you? The question surprised him more than he let on. I don't get sick, he said. Everybody gets sick. Not me. She made a small sound that might have been skepticism. And what's off limits? He considered the question seriously. My things are my things. Don't go through my packs. Don't touch the traps. You could lose a hand. Don't go past the eastern tree line alone. The drop on the far side isn't visible until you're already on it. What else? Don't ask me questions I haven't offered answers to, he said. I'll tell you what you need to know. Another long pause. Fine, she said. Same rule applies to you. He said nothing. The wind moved through the pines around them, and the horses pulled steadily, and Silver Ridge was already invisible behind the first ridge of mountain. Ahead, the trail wound upward into a world that was mostly white and gray and relentlessly indifferent. Cole Barrett watched it with the calm of a man who had long since made his peace with indifference. Beside him, Vivian Mercer watched it with something harder to name. The cabin revealed itself on the second afternoon in a clearing that the mountains seemed to tolerate rather than welcome. It sat backed against a granite shelf, low and solid, built from timber Cole had cut and laid himself over 3 seasons. It wasn't much to look at. A main room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping area partitioned off by a heavy curtain, a lean-to kitchen attached to the east wall, and a root cellar dug into the hillside behind. It had exactly 1 window. Vivian stepped down from the wagon and stood in the clearing looking at it. Cole unhitched the horses and led them to the small barn without comment. He came back to find her in the same spot. It's smaller than the letter described, she said. I didn't describe it in the letter. The agency's description said established homestead. It is established. She turned to look at him. There was something working in her expression that he couldn't entirely read. Not disappointment, exactly. More like recalibration, like she was adjusting numbers in a column. All right, she said, and picked up her bag and walked to the door. He followed. Inside, the air was cold. The fire had been banked low while he was gone, and it took him 20 minutes to bring it back up to a livable temperature. He walked her through the cabin with the efficiency of a man giving a tour of a tool shed. Here's the wood stack. Here's the water barrel. Check the level every morning. It freezes at the base overnight. Here's the root cellar ladder. Watch the 3rd rung. Here's the list on the wall. The list was long. She read it once, all the way through, without speaking. Any questions? He said. The feed ratio for the horses, she said. Is this adjusted for winter weight or standard? He looked at her. Winter weight, he said. She nodded. He showed her where she'd sleep. The main sleeping area, behind the curtain. He'd moved a cot into the lean-to kitchen for himself. It wasn't a conversation he wanted to have out loud, so he just showed her the arrangement and waited to see if she argued. She didn't. I'll start dinner, she said. He was almost to the door when she added quietly, Thank you for the sleeping arrangements. He stopped. Don't thank me, he said. It's practical. If the fire drops overnight, I need to know faster than you do. It was true. It was also not the whole truth. He kept walking. She burned the first 3 meals. Not catastrophically, not in a way that destroyed anything or wasted precious stores. But the first dinner was scorched on the bottom, the second was watery and undersalted, and the third was edible only because Cole had a high tolerance for food that was more fuel than pleasure. He ate all 3 without complaint. On the fourth night, she made something with dried venison and root vegetables, and a handful of dried herbs she'd found in a cloth bag hanging near the stove. He didn't know what she'd done differently, but it was hot and it was good, and when he looked up from the bowl, he found her watching him with an expression of cautious assessment. "Better?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, just the one word. She went back to eating, but something in her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. He noticed. The days developed a rhythm. He was up before dawn, out checking lines and hauling wood before the light changed. She was up shortly after. He'd hear the fire being stoked and the sound of the water barrel lid, and then silence as she worked through the morning. When he came in midday, there was food. She was learning the list, making small improvements he hadn't asked for, rearranging the root cellar shelves so the inventory was visible at a glance, mending a crack in the barn door frame with spare timber she'd found in the lean-to. He didn't compliment her on it, but he started leaving the morning wood already stacked inside the door instead of on the porch. The first real test came in the second week. A storm system moved down from the north with very little warning, the kind of sudden, vicious blizzard that the Rockies produced with casual cruelty, as though to remind anyone living in them that their presence was conditional. Cole had been out checking a trap line on the south slope when the sky changed from white to a particular shade of gray that meant bad things were coming fast. He pushed the horses hard getting back. The cabin was dark when he came through the door. "Vivian." No answer. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not panic, he didn't do panic, but its functional equivalent. "Vivian." "Root cellar." Her voice came from the floor hatch, muffled. "I'm reorganizing." He stood in the dark cabin and breathed once. "Storm's coming," he said. "Hard. Close the hatch and get the fire up." Her head appeared through the floor hatch a moment later. She had a smear of dirt on her forehead and a lantern in one hand. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. Get the fire up and fill every container we have from the water barrel. Do it now." She didn't ask questions. She pulled herself out of the cellar and moved. He went back to the barn to secure the horses and double-check the feed. By the time he got back inside, the fire was genuinely roaring. She'd done it right, layering the fuel. And every pot and bucket and basin in the cabin was full of water, lined up against the wall. She was standing in the middle of the room, looking at him. "Anything else?" she said. "Check the window seal," he said, pulling off his coat. "There's tar in the box under the workbench. If the cold's coming through the frame, press it in before the temperature drops." She went to work. He watched her from the corner of his eye, moving efficiently, no wasted motion, pressing the dark tar into the window frame with the focused patience of someone who understood that the difference between a good seal and a bad one was whether your fingers stayed attached overnight. The storm hit an hour later. It was bad. Wind that made the walls sound like they were being beaten. Cold that crept under every small gap, like something looking for a way in. They spent 3 days inside that cabin while the mountain buried itself, and by the end of it, Cole Barrett knew a few things about Vivian Mercer that he hadn't known before. She wasn't afraid of silence. That surprised him. He'd expected a city woman to fill every quiet moment with words, with nervous conversation, with the kinds of comments people made when they didn't know how to be still. Instead, she matched him, reading when she could, mending when she couldn't, sometimes just sitting near the fire watching the flames with the still expression of someone processing things they weren't ready to say out loud. She wasn't squeamish. He'd had to butcher a rabbit on the second day of the storm, working on the kitchen table because there was nowhere else to do it. She hadn't flinched. She'd moved the lantern so he had better light without being asked. She was also, as he'd already known, deeply private about something. On the second evening, with the storm howling outside and both of them tired of staring at the same 4 walls, Cole had said, almost without deciding to, "The bruise on your jaw, when you arrived." She'd looked up from the sock she was mending. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes went careful and still. "Old," she said. "I can see that." "Then you've answered your own question." "I wasn't asking how old it was." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind hammered at the wood. "I know what you were asking," she said, and looked back down at the sock. He didn't push. He'd said he wouldn't, and he meant it. But the bruise and the single bag and the torn dress and the past tense she'd used about being an accountant, Those things lived in the back of his mind like pieces of a trap he didn't have all the parts for yet. On a clear day in the third week, with the storm memory gone and the sky a hard, brilliant blue, Cole took her out behind the cabin with the Winchester. She'd never fired a gun. She was honest about that. He appreciated honesty more than he appreciated almost anything else. "You're going to hate the first 10 tries," he said. "I've hated worse things," she said. He showed her the loading and the safety and the basic mechanics before he let her touch the trigger. She listened with complete attention, the kind of attention that didn't ask unnecessary questions because it was actually retaining information the first time. The first shot went 3 feet wide of the tree stump he'd set up. The recoil knocked her back a step, and she nearly dropped the rifle. "Brace into it," he said. "You're fighting it before it fires. Lean forward." "I'm leaning forward." "More." She tried again, 2 feet wide. "Your grip on the stock is wrong. Here." He adjusted her hands without thinking about it, moved her right thumb and repositioned her left palm, and the contact was brief and impersonal, but he felt her go very still under his hands. He stepped back. "Try again," he said. The third shot hit the edge of the stump. She lowered the rifle and looked at the stump with an expression of pure calculation. "I'm pulling left," she said. "Yeah." "Because my left arm is overcompensating for the weight." "That's right." She adjusted her own stance. He said nothing. She fired again and hit the stump dead center. She didn't cheer or express satisfaction. She loaded again and fired again and hit the stump twice more in a row. "That's enough for today," Cole said. "I want to do it again." Rifle hand gets tired. You lose accuracy before you know you've lost it, and then you build bad habits correcting for something that isn't real. Tomorrow. She held the rifle for a moment, looking at the stump. "What do I do if something comes while you're out and I have one shot?" she said. "One clear shot and I can't miss?" "What kind of something?" "Whatever kind is worst." He thought about it seriously. "Front shoulder," he said. "Not the chest, the front shoulder, just below the neck. It breaks the animal's ability to charge and usually drops it. And if it doesn't drop, then you put your second shot in the same place and back up." She looked at him. "That's it?" she said. "That's it," he said. "Most problems in the mountains come down to one decision made correctly." She looked back at the stump. "All right," she said, and handed him the rifle. They were building something in those weeks. Cole would not have called it friendship. That word suggested a warmth he wasn't ready to put a name to. But there was a functional ease developing between them, the way a tool fits a hand after enough use. He knew how she took her coffee, black, no sweetener. She claimed she'd run out of the preference for sugar somewhere in eastern Kansas, which she said with no further explanation. He knew she woke once in the night, every night, and checked the window before going back to sleep. He knew she sometimes sat with a small notebook and wrote in it in a compact, controlled hand, and that she closed it when he came near. He didn't ask about the notebook. She knew how to read his silences, which ones meant leave him alone and which ones meant simply that he was thinking. She knew he took 2 cups of coffee in the morning and nothing in the afternoon. She knew the sound that the north wall made before a wind change because he'd told her once. They were, in the quiet and brutal isolation of the mountain winter, slowly becoming something like partners. Not a love story. He wouldn't have called it that. A survival arrangement that was working better than expected. That was what he told himself. It was late January when he came home to find her sitting on the floor of the cabin. Not hurt, not sick, just sitting on the floor with her back against the base of the bunk, knees pulled up, looking at nothing in particular. The fire was fine, the food was on the stove, everything was exactly as it should be. He stood in the doorway. "Vivian." She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but they had the look of someone who'd been somewhere very dark and had only recently started coming back. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't say you weren't." He came in, took off his coat, and put the kettle on the fire. He didn't ask her to get up, and he didn't ask what was wrong. He made 2 cups of coffee, and he set one down on the floor beside her, and he took his to the chair by the fire, and he sat. That was it. She stayed on the floor. He stayed in the chair. The fire worked. The wind ran along the outside of the cabin in long, low notes. After a while, she said, "Do you ever miss people? Specific people you've lost?" He thought about it. "Yes," he said. "What do you do with it?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I let it be there," he said. I don't push it down and I don't feed it. I just let it exist and wait for it to quiet. She was quiet for a moment. Does it always quiet? She asked. Eventually, he said. Not always when you want it to. She picked up the coffee and held it in both hands. That's the most you've said about yourself in 3 weeks, she said. Don't get used to it, he said. She made that small sound again, the one that might have been a laugh if it had gone a little further. He thought, she's afraid of someone. Whoever gave her that bruise, she's still afraid of them. He didn't say it. He looked into the fire and let the evening be what it was. And outside the mountain held them both in its cold, indifferent grip, and inside the warmth was enough. For now, February came with a brief, deceptive thaw. 3 days of above-freezing temperatures that made the snow turn heavy and gray, and then hard again when the cold returned. Cole read the thaw for what it was. Starvation season for predators. When prey was harder to find and the pack hierarchy was under pressure, things that normally kept their distance stopped keeping it. He told her before he left on the 4-day trap run. I'll be back Thursday at the latest, he said, loading the saddlebags. If it's Friday, there was weather. And if it's Saturday, she said, come to town. Don't come looking for me. She stood in the barn doorway with her arms crossed, coat buttoned to the chin. What should I be watching for? She asked. He paused. Tracks, he said. This time of year, wolf packs range farther. If you see prints near the tree line, don't go near the tree line. And if they come to me? He looked at her. They won't, he said. The barn smell usually keeps them back. She held his gaze with the expression he'd started to recognize, the one where she was filing information and didn't like the gaps in it. But if they do, she said. He tightened the saddle strap. You know where the rifle is, he said. He rode out. He was 2 days out, working a line along the northwest ridge, when the blizzard caught him. Not the dramatic kind that gave warning. This one came out of a clear afternoon in less than an hour, the temperature dropping 20 degrees as a pressure system rolled off the peaks with total disregard for anyone's plans. By the time he recognized what was happening, it was already unsafe to ride back, and he made camp in a rocky overhang and waited it out with the horses and the cold and the uncomfortable mental math of how many days he was going to be late. Vivian was alone in the cabin. He'd built that cabin to be defensible. The door was solid. The shutters were heavy. She had the rifle and she knew how to use it. He'd watched her put 4 clean shots into a target at 40 yards just last week. She was fine. He told himself that every 4 hours when he woke to check the horses, and he almost believed it each time. What she never fully told him, what came out in pieces over the weeks after, was the sequence of it. She'd heard the dogs first. The homestead had 3 dogs, 2 working dogs that slept in the barn, and an older male named Grit who sometimes slept inside. Around midnight on the 3rd day of Cole's absence, all 3 started making sounds she'd never heard from them before. Not barking. A lower, different sound. Grit was standing at the base of the door with his hackles raised and his whole body vibrating. She got up. She pulled on her coat and her boots, and she took the rifle from the wall and checked the load the way Cole had shown her. Through the single window, with the frost half covering the glass, she could see shapes at the tree line. She counted. 5. Maybe 6. The largest one was already crossing the clearing. She told him later that she'd thought about opening the door. She hadn't, obviously, but she'd thought about it, because there was some part of her that had believed if she stayed behind wood she wasn't really facing it, that it wasn't really happening. She recognized that impulse for what it was, and she'd put the rifle through the shutter slot instead. Cold barrel against the cold wood. Target in the dark. She'd fired. The sound was enormous in the frozen night. It rolled off the granite shelf behind the cabin and came back doubled, and the shapes at the tree line scattered. The largest one dropped. She reloaded. Waited. The remaining animals circled for a while, and then, whether because of the shot or because Grit was now genuinely howling with a ferocity she hadn't known he had, they pulled back into the trees and didn't come out again. She stayed at the shutter until dawn. In the morning light, she saw the dead animal in the snow, a large gray wolf, fully grown, 30, 40 pounds. She opened the door. Grit went out first. She followed. She stood over the wolf for a long time. Mutt. Cole came over the ridge on the afternoon of the 4th day, the horses exhausted and ice on his coat. He saw the body in the snow from 100 yards out, He pushed the horses faster than they wanted to go. She was in the barn, working. Mending a piece of tack that had cracked in the cold, her fingers moving steadily through the stiff leather. She had a bruise across her left cheekbone, fresh, purpling at the edges, and a deep scratch on her forearm that she'd bandaged with strips from an old shirt. She looked up when he came in. "You're early," she said. He looked at her. The bruise, the bandaged arm, the expression on her face that was tired and guarded, and something else, something below both of those. "What happened?" he said. "Wolf pack. 6 of them, maybe more. I saw the one in the snow." "I put it there," she said. He stood in the doorway of his barn, trail-worn and cold, looking at this woman who had arrived on his platform 2 months ago in a ruined velvet dress and bare hands, and who was sitting in his barn mending leather and telling him she'd shot a wolf at midnight to protect his animals like it was a fact she was submitting for record. "You all right?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "The recoil knocked me sideways," she said. "Hit the shutter frame." She gestured at her cheekbone. "Arm is from grit. He got too excited coming out in the morning, knocked me down. You stayed at the shutter all night." "I didn't know if they'd come back. They usually don't." "I didn't know that then." He walked to the tack bench and stood beside her, looking at the strip of bandage on her arm. She'd done it neatly, clean. He didn't touch it. "The animals are fine," she said. "Checked them all this morning. I fed the horses extra." He looked at her. The full weight of what she'd done sitting right there between them. Not the heroics of it, not the drama, but the simple practical reality of a woman alone in a mountain night with a wolf pack outside her door, who had made the right decision every single time. "Good," he said. He picked up the other end of the tack and held it while she worked. She didn't say thank you, and he didn't offer praise, and neither of them said another word for a long time. And the horses moved in their stalls. And outside, the dead wolf lay where it had fallen in the white February snow. Something had changed. He couldn't put a name to it, and he didn't try. But later that evening, when he caught himself watching her hands as she wrote in that small notebook, the efficient private script moving across the page, he knew that whatever she was carrying and whatever she was running from, it had stopped feeling like something outside his concern. It had started feeling like something he'd walk into a storm for. He pushed that thought down and went to check on the horses a second time because there was nothing useful to do with a thought like that. Not yet. 3 days after the wolf incident, Cole found the notebook. He wasn't looking for it. That was the truth he held on to afterward. He hadn't gone searching. He'd been reaching for a piece of cord on the shelf above the bunk, and the notebook had come down with it, falling open on the floor face up, and he'd seen 3 lines before he could make himself look away. "They will send someone eventually. VL doesn't leave things unfinished. When they come, don't let Cole get involved. This is not his problem." He picked it up and set it on the bunk, closed, and he didn't read another word. But those 3 lines sat in his head all through the morning like a coal that wouldn't go out. VEL, someone was coming. And she'd been thinking about it, planning for it, alone, in the private hours when she wrote in that notebook by firelight, while he was 10 feet away in the lean-to, assuming she was processing homesickness or grief or the ordinary weight of a life upended. She was planning how to keep him out of something she was clearly already deep inside. He didn't confront her. Not that morning. He went out and checked the trap lines and split a full cord of wood and came back inside and ate the meal she'd made and said nothing. He watched her move through the cabin, efficient, capable, that same careful composure she wore like armor. And he thought about 3 lines of handwriting and a bruise that was fading to yellow at the edges of her jaw. That evening, after the fire had settled and the wind had picked up its usual nightly argument with the eaves, he said, "You said you were an accountant." She was at the table with the food store's ledger he'd started letting her manage. She didn't look up immediately. That half-second pause told him everything about how ready she wasn't for this conversation. "I was," she said. "For who?" Another pause, longer. "A firm in Philadelphia," she said. "Private clients." "What kind of private clients?" She set down the pencil. When she looked up, her expression was the careful, contained one. Not hostile, not afraid, just sealed tight like a window that had been latched from the inside. "Why are you asking me this now?" she said. "Because you've been here 2 months," he said, "and you're still not telling me what you're running from. and I've been patient enough. I told you I don't owe you answers you haven't earned. Fair, he said, and I'm not saying you owe me anything. I'm saying that whatever it is, it's already here with us in this cabin. Has been since the first day, and I'd rather know what I'm sharing space with. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, snow was starting again. The soft, patient kind that built up silently and didn't announce itself until morning. You should have sent me back, she said. When you saw me on that platform, you should have put me back on the train. Probably, he said. I didn't. Why not? He looked at her steadily. Because you asked me not to. Something shifted in her face. A small, involuntary thing, quickly recovered. She picked up the pencil again and turned it in her fingers without writing anything. I worked for one client for the last 3 years, she said finally. Not a firm. One man. He needed someone who could manage complex accounts across multiple holdings, property, contracts, payments to various parties. She paused. I was good at my job. Too good, maybe. Cole said nothing. He recognized the rhythm of someone who had decided to say something and needed to get there at their own pace. The payments didn't add up to anything legal, she said. Not all of them. I started seeing it in the second year. Small things first, then bigger. Payments to officials in amounts that matched contract awards. Land purchases at a fraction of value right before settlements were recorded. And then she stopped. Started again. There were payments to men I recognized as hired agents, not security, not investigators. She looked at him. Cleaners. The kind of men who make problems disappear. The fire settled in its grate. I started copying records, she said. Not all at once. A few pages at a time, over months. Into a ledger of my own. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just couldn't. I kept thinking someone should have it, in case something happened to me. And then something did, Cole said. She touched the side of her jaw. Not the bruise, which had faded, but the place where it had been. He found out what I'd been doing, she said. I don't know how. One of the other clerks, maybe, or someone going through my things. I came back from lunch one afternoon and 2 men were waiting in my office. A beat. I ran. You got out. Barely. She looked down at the table. I had the ledger in my coat. I had $11. I took the first train west that was leaving, and I kept changing lines until I ran out of money, and then I answered the agency advertisement because I needed somewhere that wasn't a city. She said it plainly, without drama. Somewhere no one would look for an accountant from Philadelphia. Cole was quiet for a moment. This man, he said. Who is he? She met his eyes. His name is Victor Langford, she said. He watched her face as she said it, the slight tension in her jaw, the way she held herself very still, as if the name itself had weight. He'd heard the name. Not here, not in Silver Ridge, which was too high and too small for that kind of reach. But before. Years back, when he'd had occasion to pass through Denver, he'd heard men at a rail office talk about Langford the way men talked about weather systems. Not as something that could be reasoned with, only tracked and avoided. Railroad money. The kind that had bought half a territory and was working on the other half. Where's the ledger now? Cole said. She held his gaze. Somewhere safe, she said. In this cabin? Somewhere safe, she repeated. He nodded once. He wasn't going to push on that. All right, he said. She blinked. All right? That's it? What did you expect? I expected... She stopped, shook her head slightly, as if she'd had a speech prepared and the situation had failed to require it. I expected an argument, or you telling me to leave. Why would I tell you to leave? Because I brought something dangerous into your home, she said. Because I lied to you about who I was. You didn't lie, he said. You didn't tell me. There's a difference. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression was doing something complicated that she couldn't entirely suppress, and she pressed her mouth together and looked back down at the ledger. Get some sleep, Cole said, standing. Tomorrow's cold check day and the East Line needs resetting. He went to the lean-to. He lay on the cot in the cold kitchen space and looked at the ceiling and thought about a man named Victor Langford and a ledger hidden somewhere in his cabin and the woman sleeping on the other side of the curtain who had been carrying all of it alone for months. He didn't sleep well. But in the morning, he got up and made coffee, and when she came out of the sleeping area still pulling her hair back, he handed her a cup without a word, and they started the day. And that was a kind of answer, too. March arrived with the grudging reluctance of a season that knew it was losing. The cold didn't break. It never fully broke in the high Rockies, not until late April, and sometimes not even then. But the quality of it changed, less absolute, less like the world had decided to freeze permanently, and more like it was considering other options. The days got longer by minutes. Cole noticed, and he thought Vivian noticed too, though she didn't say anything about it. What she did do was spend more time outside, checking on things she didn't strictly need to check on, standing in the clearing with her face tipped up to a sky that was sometimes, briefly, the color of something other than gray. She was stronger than she'd been in December. That was simply true, and he recognized it the way he recognized changes in terrain, as information, not sentiment. Her hands had calloused. She moved through the homestead routines without thinking about them, the way the body eventually takes over from the mind when a task becomes familiar enough. She could read the animals' moods. She knew which of the horses was going to be difficult on cold mornings. She could tell the difference between the sounds the wind made when it was just passing through and the sounds it made when it meant to stay. She'd also started asking better questions. Not more questions, better ones. Fewer gaps, less clarifying, more about the reasoning behind things rather than just the mechanics. One morning in early March, she was watching him set a snare along the south run, and she said, "Why that angle? The approach looks easier from the other direction." "Because the easier approach is the one they use," he said. "Put the snare where they feel comfortable, not where they feel exposed." She thought about that. "That works on people too," she said. "Most things that work in the mountains work on people too," he said. She was quiet a moment, then, "Is that why you're hard to read? You don't use the comfortable approach?" He looked at her. She was watching the snare, not him, her expression merely curious. "I'm not trying to be hard to read," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it hard." He didn't have an answer for that. He finished setting the snare, and they walked back toward the cabin through snow that was starting, at the southern edges of the clearing, to show a faint pale green beneath its surface. He was aware of her beside him in a way that had been building for weeks, and that he was actively choosing not to examine directly. It was the kind of awareness that lived in small things. The fact that he noticed when she changed where she sat in the evenings, the fact that he was listening for her footstep when he came back from the lines, the fact that 3 weeks ago he'd have described her as a practical arrangement and now couldn't quite make that description sit flat. He left it alone. Whatever it was, it would wait. The incident with the supply run happened on a Tuesday in the second week of March. Cole had been planning to go down to Silver Ridge for provisions. The coffee was nearly gone, and they were low on lamp oil, and there were a few hardware items he'd been putting off. Vivian had given him a list the night before, neat and organized in order of importance, which he'd folded and put in his coat pocket without comment. At breakfast she said, "I want to come." He looked up. "Town," she said. "I want to come with you." He held his coffee cup and looked at her steadily, and she looked back at him with the expression that meant she'd already considered the counter-arguments and was prepared for them. "It's a 2-day ride," he said. "I know how far town is. The trail down the east side is rough this time of year, ice under the melt. I've ridden worse." He hadn't actually known she could ride until 3 weeks ago, when she'd quietly saddled one of the horses for a perimeter check without mentioning that she'd never told him she knew how. She rode well, it turned out, better than he expected. "You haven't been to town since you arrived," he said. "That's why I want to go," she said. Something in the way she said it, flat and direct, without the careful composure she usually maintained, made him read it differently. Not restlessness, need, the kind that had nothing to do with supplies and everything to do with the particular suffocation of months of isolation, even if the isolation had been chosen. He put his cup down. "All right," he said. She'd been braced for an argument. He could tell by the way her expression recalibrated when he agreed. She covered it quickly. "I'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said. She was ready in 15. Morn. Silver Ridge in early March was half-thawed and fully muddy and smelled of everything winter had preserved and spring was now reconsidering. The main street was a river of slush. Someone had laid boards across the worst of it, and the townspeople navigated them with the expertise of people who'd been doing it every year for decades. Vivian rode in beside him without appearing to look at anything in particular, which meant she was looking at everything. Cole did the hardware first, the practical stops where transaction was the main event and conversation was minimal. She came with him into the general store, and he caught Hatch watching her the way he'd watched her when she'd first arrived, with that shopkeeper's assessment that was partly commerce and partly nosiness. "Mrs. Barrett," Hatch said, which was the first time Cole had heard anyone say that, and he felt Vivian go very slightly still beside him. "Mr. Hatch," she said pleasantly, and handed him the list without missing a beat. They were leaving with the last of the parcels when Cole saw the poster. It was nailed to the post outside the land office. A notice, not quite a wanted poster, but close enough that his eye caught it before his mind identified why. A name. Vivian Mercer. A description. A contact through the Pinkerton agency. Information sought. He kept walking, didn't look at her, loaded the parcels into the wagon, and said quietly, "We're leaving now." "I saw it," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "How long do you think it's been up?" "I don't know." A pause. "At least a few days. Maybe longer." He untied the horses. She climbed up onto the wagon bench without being asked, and he could see, from the set of her shoulders and the particular way she was holding her face, that she was doing what she always did when she was frightened, pulling everything inward until only the surface was visible. They were 2 blocks down the road when she said, "I'm sorry." "Don't," he said. "Cole, I said don't." He kept his eyes on the road. "You've been apologizing in advance for 6 weeks. Stop." She was silent. "They'll know the area now," he said. "They'll start asking around town." He thought for a moment. Hatch won't talk. He doesn't like outside authority. Gerald at the post office might. He's nervous, and nervous men answer questions when they're asked direct. He glanced at her. "Anyone else you've had contact with?" "The preacher who married us," she said. "But I don't think Brock will say nothing. He's been here 20 years and he doesn't talk about his business." Cole worked through the angles. "The poster goes up now. That means they've been following the agency trail. They know you came west. They may not know exactly how far yet." "They'll find out." "Yes," he said. "They will." She turned to look at him. The afternoon sun was sharp and cold, catching the edges of her face. "What do you want to do?" she said. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said." "What do you want to do?" "You could go to the Pinkerton office, tell them where I am, collect whatever they're offering." A beat. "I wouldn't blame you." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a stupid thing to say," he said. "Is it?" "Yeah," he said. "It is." He turned back to the road. "We go home. We figure out the next step. That's what we do." The wagon moved through the March mud, and the mountain rose ahead of them in the afternoon light, and Vivian Mercer sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned slightly away, and didn't say another word for the rest of the ride. But somewhere around the second ridge, when the trail tilted upward and the pines closed in on both sides, her shoulder settled against his arm. Not dramatically, not deliberately, just the small, tired lean of someone who was done holding themselves entirely upright for one day. He didn't move away. The horses found the trail home in the failing light, and the mountain took them back in, and whatever was coming, it wasn't here yet. They didn't talk about the poster that night. There was an unspoken agreement between them that some things needed to be set down before they could be picked back up, that processing and planning were 2 different activities, and trying to do both at once produced neither. Cole fed the horses. Vivian made dinner. They ate. The fire did what fires do, and somewhere in the ordinary rhythm of it, the sharp edge of the afternoon dulled enough that they could both breathe. But Cole was thinking. He was thinking all through dinner and through the hour after. When Vivian wrote in her notebook and he sharpened a blade, he didn't strictly need to sharpen. He was running the problem the way he ran any problem in the mountains, methodically, without panic, from the outside in. The Pinkerton agency was not local law. They answered to whoever paid them, and in this case, whoever paid them was Victor Langford, which meant they had essentially unlimited resources and no particular obligation to legal process. A Pinkerton notice in Silver Ridge meant someone had already narrowed the geography significantly, not to the homestead, not yet, but to the region, to the mountain. it would get more specific. The only question was how fast. The next morning, he saddled up before breakfast and rode back down to Silver Ridge alone, which was almost not something he'd planned to do, and which he didn't tell Vivian about until he was already at the door. She looked up from the stove. "I need to know what they know," he said. "I'll be back tonight. Cole, stay inside, both dogs in with you." He was gone before she could argue. In town, he went to the saloon first, because saloons in small mountain towns functioned as the actual communications infrastructure. He bought a drink he didn't intend to finish, and he listened, which was a skill most people underestimated because it looked like doing nothing. Within 40 minutes, he had what he needed. The Pinkerton agent had arrived 4 days ago, a man named Dorian Pike, traveling with 2 other men who were not identified as Pinkertons but who wore guns in the manner of men for whom guns were professional equipment rather than tools or habit. Pike had spoken to the sheriff, a decent man named Aldous who had the look of someone deeply uncomfortable with the situation, and had asked questions about recent arrivals and marriages registered in the past 6 months. Cole finished his drink and walked to the sheriff's office. Aldous was at his desk. He was a compact man in his 50s with a gray mustache and the general expression of someone who had seen enough to be tired but not enough to be cynical. He looked up when Cole came in, and something in his expression said he'd been expecting this visit. "Barrett," he said. "Aldous." Cole sat in the chair across from the desk without being invited. "Tell me about the Pinkerton man." Aldous leaned back. "What makes you think—" "Don't," Cole said. "I've known you 8 years. I know when you're going to say something useful and when you're going to say something political. Skip the second one." The sheriff looked at him for a moment, then forward at his own hands. "His name is Dorian Pike," Aldous said. "He's got a commission signed by a federal magistrate out of Denver, which means I have to cooperate with him on paper. In practice, his warrant is for a woman named Vivian Mercer, wanted for theft of private documents and breach of confidential employment." A pause. "That's what it says on paper. And off paper?" "Off paper, he's got 3 men with him, and he asked specifically about homesteads in the upper elevations. Asked about you by name." Cole felt something go still and cold in his chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. "Hatch?" he said. Hatch told him nothing. Gerald told him you'd ordered a mail-order bride last fall and she'd arrived in December. Aldous met his eyes. "I'm sorry, Cole. Gerald didn't know what he was giving." "I know." He stood. "Where's Pike now?" "Rode out yesterday morning, North Trail." The sheriff paused. "Cole? If she's done something—" "She witnessed something," Cole said. "That's different." Aldous looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that was doing the math on loyalty versus obligation. "I can't stop him," the sheriff said. "Legally. The commission is real." "I know. But I can be slow," Aldous said, "about reporting conversations I've had." Cole held the man's gaze. "Appreciate it," he said, and walked out. He pushed the horse hard going back up the mountain, not because speed would change anything now, but because the nervous energy that lived in his chest needed somewhere to go, and the horse was the only available option. The North Trail. Pike had taken the North Trail, which meant he already had enough of a bearing to choose correctly between 2 approaches, which meant his information was better than Cole had hoped. Vivian was in the clearing when he rode in, splitting wood. She wasn't doing it badly, which a month ago would have surprised him. She'd figured out the weight distribution issue early in February, and now she split with a clean, economical motion that wasted nothing. She looked up when he came through the tree line. She read his face before he said a word. "They know where we are," she said. It wasn't a question. "Not exactly," he said, dismounting. "Close enough." She drove the axe into the splitting block and stood with her hands on the handle, looking at him. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. Pike, the commission, the North Trail, Gerald's inadvertent disclosure. He didn't soften any of it, and she didn't ask him to. She listened with the still absorbing attention she gave to things that mattered, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long?" she said. "A day. 2 if the trail gives them trouble." He paused. "I need to know about the ledger." She looked at him. "I need to know if it exists and if it's here," he said. "I'm not asking where. I'm asking if." A long pause. "Yes," she said. "It's here." Is there enough in it to do what you said? Expose what Langford's been doing? If it reaches the right person, she said. The problem is finding someone he hasn't bought. A federal judge, Cole said. Not territorial, federal, beyond the reach of railroad money. They exist, she said carefully. I knew of one in Denver, Judge Emmett Krall. He'd prosecuted a railroad land fraud case 3 years ago against one of Langford's competitors. He was offered a bribe and reported it instead. You know this for certain? I researched him, she said, before I ran. I knew if the ledger was ever going to do anything useful, it needed the right destination. She paused. But getting it to Denver is the problem. If Pike catches up to us before... He won't, Cole said. You don't know that. No, he said. But I know this mountain better than any Pinkerton from back east, and that counts for something. She looked at him with an expression that was trying to decide whether that was genuine confidence or the kind of thing men said when they didn't have a better answer. He wasn't entirely sure himself. Come inside, he said. We need to make a plan. The plan, as plans go, was imperfect. It had to be. Because imperfect plans were the only kind available when the situation had too many variables and not enough time. They sat at the table with the lamp between them and Cole's hand-drawn map of the surrounding terrain spread across the food ledger, and they worked through it. The first question was whether to run or hold. Running had the advantage of mobility and the disadvantage of exposure. 2 people on a trail were visible in ways that a cabin in a clearing was not. Holding had the advantage of defensibility and the disadvantage that a defended position was only useful if help was eventually coming, and help was not coming. We don't run, Cole said. Not yet. If we leave now, we're on open trail and we can't outpace 3 armed men. So we stay, Vivian said. We prepare to stay, he said, and we prepare to move if we have to, both. What does preparing to move look like? Pack what you can't afford to lose into the saddlebags and leave them packed. Have the horses ready to go in under 10 minutes. He looked at the map. If it comes to leaving, we go west, not back down to Silver Ridge. There's a route through the Callaway Pass, harder trail but faster if you know it, and it comes out on the far side of the range near a mail relay station. You know this route? I've run it twice, he said. Once in October, once in early spring. Not in February. No, he said honestly. Not in February. She absorbed that. And the ledger, she said. Separate from everything else, he said. Not in the saddlebags, not in the cabin, somewhere on you, if we're moving. She nodded slowly. She'd already thought about this. He could tell by the fact that she wasn't surprised by the suggestion. There's something else, she said. He waited. The ledger alone is evidence, she said, but it's evidence from a former employee who ran. A good lawyer, some Prairie, and Langford has 20 of them, could argue I fabricated it, altered records. She paused. But if someone else confirmed it, someone who'd seen the same things. There was another accountant, a man named Samuel Briggs. He managed Langford's Western holdings. I think he saw what I saw. You think? I think he knew. Whether he'd testify is another question. She looked at her hands. He was afraid. More afraid than me, I think, because he had a family. Cole thought about that. Where is he? Last I knew, managing an office in Cheyenne. She looked up. If we got the ledger to Judge Krall and Briggs confirmed even part of it, one thing at a time, Cole said. Right now we deal with Pike. She nodded, but he could see her mind working. Not out of anxiety, but out of the same accountant's instinct that had gotten her into this in the first place. She thought in sequences, in chains of cause and effect, in what happened after what happened. It was the same quality that made her good at managing the food stores, and the same quality that had made her copy those records month after month, with no certain plan for what to do with them. She couldn't help but look ahead. He couldn't help but notice that he found that quality, against all his inclinations, something close to beautiful. He looked back at the map. Well, Dorian Pike arrived the next afternoon. Cole saw him first. He'd been on the roof checking the shingle ties, something that genuinely needed doing and that also gave him a clear line of sight to the approach trail, when 3 riders came out of the eastern tree line into the lower edge of the clearing. He came down the ladder without rushing. Vivian, he said, coming through the door, they're here. She was at the table. She stood up immediately and moved to the window, which told him she'd been waiting for exactly this, had probably been waiting since this morning when the horses had been restless in the way horses get when something is working its way through the trees upwind of them. 3, she said. 3. She turned from the window, and her face was composed and steady, and he could see the effort that composure cost her in the faint tension around her eyes. "The ledger," he said. "Already dealt with," she said. He didn't ask where. He picked up the Winchester and checked the load. "You're not going out there with the rifle," she said. "No," he said. "I'm answering the door with it. Different thing." The knock came about 3 minutes later. A solid, official knock, the kind that was announcing itself rather than asking. Cole opened the door. The man on his porch was not what he'd expected from a Pinkerton detective. Pike was younger than Cole had imagined, late 30s, lean in the way of someone who stayed that way deliberately. He wore a good coat and a city hat that was already suffering from mountain weather, and he carried himself with the careful authority of a man who was used to doors opening for him. Behind him, at the edge of the porch steps, 2 men waited with the relaxed readiness of professionals. Pike's eyes went to the rifle immediately. "Mr. Barrett," he said. His voice was moderate and controlled. "My name is Dorian Pike. I'm a licensed investigator holding a commission." "I know who you are," Cole said. A small pause. Pike recalibrated. "Then you know why I'm here," Pike said. "I know what you've told people you're here for," Cole said. "That's not quite the same thing." Pike's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "I have a warrant for the arrest of a woman named Vivian Mercer. I have reason to believe she's present at this property. I'm asking you to cooperate with this commission, which carries federal authority." "Federal authority," Cole said, "means a judge signed a paper. It doesn't mean you can ride onto private property in an unincorporated territory and take my wife." "Your wife," Pike repeated, "married in Silver Ridge December past. Gerald at the post office will have the registration. Reverend Brock performed the ceremony." Something moved through Pike's expression. Not quite surprise, but the adjustment of a man whose information was incomplete. "Mr. Barrett," he said after a pause, "I have no interest in making this difficult for you. The woman I'm looking for stole sensitive documents from a prominent private citizen. Whatever she's told you, she's told me everything," Cole said. That landed. Pike was good. He barely showed it, but the slight stillness that moved through him confirmed what Cole had suspected. The detective had expected to arrive here and find a husband who knew nothing, and leveraging ignorance was a different operation than leveraging complicity. "Then you understand what's at stake," Pike said, recovering smoothly. "I understand what's at stake for Victor Langford," Cole said. "Yeah." Pike held his gaze. The 2 men behind him had stopped looking relaxed. "Mr. Barrett," Pike said, and his voice had dropped slightly, taken on a quieter, more direct quality. "I'm going to be honest with you, man to man. I don't care about your wife. I care about the documents. If those documents are returned intact and unduplicated, this matter ends. Mrs. Barrett would face no further pursuit. You'd face no consequences. That's the offer." Cole looked at him for a long moment. "And if I say no?" he said. "Then I come back with more men and a harder conversation," Pike said, simply, without heat. Cole nodded slowly, as if considering. "I'll need to speak with my wife," he said. "Of course." "Come back tomorrow morning," Cole said. "I'll have an answer." Pike studied him. Cole met his gaze with the patience of a man who had spent 16 years being read by things more dangerous than a Pinkerton detective. "Tomorrow morning," Pike said finally. "First light," Cole said. Pike turned, said something quiet to his men, and the 3 of them walked back across the clearing to the tree line. Cole watched them go. They disappeared into the pines, but they didn't leave. He could see the horses through the trees, stopping, setting up camp, close enough to watch. He went inside and closed the door. Vivian was standing in the middle of the room with her arms at her sides and her face doing the thing it did when she was past pretending. "You bought us one night," she said. "I bought us one night," he agreed. "What do we do with it?" He set the rifle against the wall and stood in the middle of his cabin that he'd built board by board with his own hands, and looked at the woman who had arrived on his platform 4 months ago in a torn velvet dress. And he thought about everything between that day and this one, and he made a decision that he'd probably been moving toward for weeks without acknowledging it. "We're not giving him anything," he said. "Not the ledger, not you." She looked at him. Cole, she said carefully, they'll come back. More men. You could lose everything. The homestead, I know what I could lose, he said. Then why? Because what you're carrying could stop him, Cole said. Not just for you. For every person whose land he's taken, every family that got pushed off their property so he could run a rail line through it, He stopped, steadied. Because it's the right thing to do. And because you came to me when you needed help, and I gave you my name, and that means something to me even if it doesn't mean what either of us expected. The room was very quiet. Vivian was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not the guarded composure, not the careful assessment. Something underneath all of that, something that had been living down there for a while, and was now, in the particular crisis of this moment, too tired to stay hidden. I didn't think it would mean that much, she said quietly. To you. Neither did I, he said, and meant it. She looked away first. All right, she said after a moment. What's the plan? He thought. We need to get a copy of what's in that ledger to someone who can move on it faster than Pike can stop it, he said. Tonight, before morning. There's no way to get to Denver tonight. No, he said, but there's a mail relay rider who runs the overnight South Pass. He leaves Silver Ridge at midnight. If we can get a sealed packet to him before midnight, that's 2 hours of hard writing, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a moment. I can copy the key pages, she said, the ones with the payment records and the dates, in an hour, maybe less. Do it, he said. She was already moving. He picked up the rifle and went back to the door and stood looking out through the crack at the darkening tree line and the faint orange light of a fire where 3 men were waiting for a morning that Cole Barrett had no intention of giving them. Outside, the mountain held its cold silence, indifferent as always to what happened in the clearing below. The horses shifted in the barn. Somewhere in the middle distance, something moved through the pines. An animal, a sound, the natural restlessness of a wilderness that didn't pause for human trouble. Inside, by lamplight, Vivian's pen moved fast and precise across the paper, copying numbers and names and dates that had already cost her everything once and were about to cost them both considerably more. Cole watched the trees and waited, and the night came down around the cabin like a held breath. Vivian finished copying in 53 minutes. Cole knew because he'd been counting, in the loose way a man counts when he's standing at a door watching tree-line shadows and trying not to think about how little margin they had. She came to him with 6 folded pages, tight and dense, with her small, precise handwriting, and a separate sheet with a single paragraph addressed to Judge Emmett Krall in Denver. The paragraph was direct and without drama. Dates, names, the nature of the evidence, and a request that the original ledger be subpoenaed through federal process before any Pinkerton commission could interfere with it. That's enough, Cole said, looking at the pages. It's the spine of it, she said. Payment dates, amounts, names of recipients, cross-referenced against contract awards. A federal judge with half a brain can see the pattern in 10 minutes. She paused. It won't be enough to convict, but it'll be enough to open an investigation, and an investigation is enough to freeze everything he's doing. That buys time for the original. Cole folded the pages and sealed them into an oilskin packet he used for keeping documents dry on the trail. He wrote Krall's name on the outside in his own hand. You can't ride down yourself, Vivian said. No, he agreed. Pike's men will be watching the trail. Then how? There's another way down, he said. Southwest slope. It's rough and it's longer and in the dark. It's not something I'd do for fun, but they won't be watching it because they don't know it exists. He picked up his coat. I'll be back before first light. She looked at him. The lamp was burning low and the cabin was all shadow and firelight, and her expression was doing something complicated that she wasn't bothering to hide entirely. Be careful, she said. Not come back safe or anything that admitted too much. Just be careful, which was Vivian's version of the same thing, and he understood that. Bar the door, he said. Don't open it for anything that doesn't sound like me. What does you sound like? 3 knocks, pause, 1. She nodded. He went out the back through the lean-to and took the long way around the barn to avoid the sight line from the eastern tree line, moving low and using the shadow of the granite shelf behind the cabin until he hit the southwest trail. It wasn't a trail, exactly. More like a route he'd memorized through repetition, a sequence of landmarks in the dark that his body knew even when his eyes didn't. The ride down was bad. Not catastrophically bad, but the kind of sustained, grinding difficult that required constant attention and offered no reward. Twice the horse picked wrong in the dark, and he had to dismount and lead her around obstacles by feel. The temperature was dropping again. Clear night sky, which meant no cloud cover, which meant everything was losing heat fast. He made Silver Ridge at 11:40. The mail rider was a young Ute man named Joseph Cade, who ran the overnight Southern Pass twice a week and was reliably the most discreet person in a 50-mile radius because discretion was simply part of the job. Cole caught him at the relay station saddling up. "I need this on the first coach to Denver," Cole said, handing him the packet. "Addressed to Judge Crawl, not the post office, the federal courthouse." Cade looked at the packet, looked at Cole. "Extra?" he said. Cole gave him everything in his coat pocket. $12 and a small folding knife that had cost him more than $12, but that was what he had. Cade put the packet in his inner breast pocket without another word and rode south into the dark. Cole turned around and rode back up the mountain. He made it back to the cabin at 2:15 in the morning, cold down to something that felt like bone level, the horse blowing hard. 3 knocks, pause, 1. The bar came off the door, and Vivian was standing there with the rifle and an expression of relief that she immediately composed into something more neutral. "Cade has it," he said, coming in. "Good," she said. "We have until morning before Pike expects his answer. And we're going to tell him no. We're going to be gone before he can ask," Cole said. She looked at him. "We can't stay," he said, taking off his coat. "Even if Pike backs off for now, which he won't, once he knows we've sent something to Denver, Langford will send more. Different kind. Men who don't bother with commissions." He looked at her steadily. "We need to be somewhere else when that happens." "Where?" he thought. "Cheyenne," he said. "You said Samuel Briggs was in Cheyenne." Something shifted in her face. "You want to go to Briggs? You said his testimony would strengthen the case." "I said it might," she said. "He was afraid, Cole. He has children. I don't know if He's had 4 months of living with what he knows," Cole said. "People change in 4 months. You know that." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I know that." "Get some sleep," he said. 2 hours. We move before dawn. You need sleep more than I do." "I'll manage. Cole." She said it with a firmness that made him stop. 2 hours. I'll wake us both." He looked at her. The lamp was almost out and the fire was low, and she was standing in the middle of the cabin with the rifle still in her hand and her hair loose and the expression on her face that wasn't quite the guarded version and wasn't quite anything he had a clean name for. 2 hours, he said. He sat in the chair by the dying fire and was asleep in less than 10 minutes. When she shook his shoulder 2 hours later, he came awake clean and fast, the way he always did, and he saw that she'd packed both sets of saddlebags and saddled the horses already, which she'd done quietly enough in the barn that he hadn't heard it. He looked at her. "Ready?" she said. They rode out of the clearing at 4 in the morning with the sky still fully dark and a hard cold at their backs, and the horses moving as quietly as horses move when they know they're going somewhere, which is not as quietly as you'd want, but quietly enough. They got 300 yards into the southwest trail before the first shot came out of the trees. It went wide, 10 feet wide, high and left, the kind of shot fired to stop rather than hit. Cole had the horse down to the trees before the sound had finished echoing, pulling Vivian's mount with him by instinct. "Pike's men," he said. "They moved in the night." "They didn't wait for morning," she said. Her voice was steady, but her breathing wasn't. "No," he was already thinking. "They can't see us in the trees. We have maybe 2 minutes before they try to flank. If we go back..." "We can't go back," he said. "The cabin is where they'll push us." He was right. Even as he said it, he could hear horses moving in the darkness to the north. The second man coming around to cut off the cabin retreat. Pike was good. He'd anticipated the early departure and moved to bracket them. 3 men. 2 that Cole could account for in the dark. 1 in the trees to the east where the shot had come from, 1 coming around north. Which meant Pike himself was somewhere he couldn't see yet, probably sitting on the approach trail where he could watch both angles. Cole dismounted. "Get down," he said quietly. Vivian was down before he finished saying it. Follow me, he said. Keep low and keep close. The horses come with us. Where are we going? Back to the cabin, he said. Not to stay. For what's in the lean-to? She didn't ask. She followed. He went in a wide arc through the trees south of the clearing, using the granite shelf as a landmark, moving with the particular kind of careful speed that was something he'd learned a long time ago. The understanding that in bad terrain, fast was usually slower than careful. He could hear the man to the north thrashing through underbrush without that understanding. Amateur noise. They made the cabin from the back. Cole went into the lean-to and came out with two things: a coil of wire and a wooden box that he handled with the specific care of someone who respected what was inside it. Vivian saw the box. "Is that blasting powder?" he said, "for clearing timber." A pause. "How much?" she said. "Enough," he said. "Go to the barn. Get both horses into the tree line to the southwest. Wait there until you hear it, and then ride. Don't wait for me." "No," she said immediately. "Vivian, don't tell me to leave without you," she said. "That's not the arrangement." "That's not—" He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression that had nothing negotiable in it. He thought about arguing and recognized that arguing would cost more time than it was worth. "Stay low," he said. "Barn to southwest tree line. Keep the horses quiet." She moved. He worked. He didn't have long. He could hear voices now. Two of them, east and north, communicating in the way men communicate when they're trying to coordinate position in the dark without giving themselves away, which is to say badly, with too many words. Pike was still silent, which was more concerning. Cole laid the wire from the blasting box in a line along the east wall of the cabin, around the corner of the lean-to, and across the approach trail. He worked fast and without a light, because a light would tell them exactly where he was. The wire arrangement was rough. He'd done this properly, methodically, for timber work, with careful measurements. This was neither proper nor methodical. It was improvised under pressure in the dark, and it would probably work, and it might also do something unexpected, and the best he could do was account for the most likely outcomes. He was threading the second wire when a flashlight beam cut across the clearing from the eastern tree line and landed squarely on the lean-to. Cole went flat. A voice. "He's at the cabin." Running footsteps. Two men, east and north, converging on the clearing. Cole pressed himself against the base of the cabin wall and watched the beam sweep back and forth, and thought about angles. He needed to be behind the granite shelf when it went. He moved along the base of the cabin wall, staying below the beam's sweep, around the north corner, and then he ran. Not gracefully, stumbling once on a route he couldn't see, catching himself with one hand in the snow. The granite shelf was 40 yards. He made it in less than that many seconds and pressed his back against it. He triggered the wire. The sound was enormous. It wasn't a single explosion. It was a sequence. The powder in the lean-to catching, and then the secondary in the pile he'd set against the east wall, and the combined effect sent a column of fire and debris upward that he felt in his teeth from behind the granite shelf. The shockwave moved through the snow in a visible ring. The east wall of the cabin blew outward. The lean-to disintegrated. He heard shouting, "One man down," from the sound of it. Not dead, but down and stunned. The other one had stopped running. Cole moved while they were disoriented, southwest, toward the tree line, toward where Vivian was supposed to be with the horses. She was exactly where he'd told her to be. Both horses. Standing in the shadow of the pines with her hand over the nearer one's nose, which was how you kept a horse from reacting to loud noise if you got there early enough. Her face was illuminated for a moment by the fire still burning where the lean-to had been, and her expression was focused and tight and absolutely present. "Go," he said, taking his horse. They rode southwest into the trees, and the fire behind them lit the clearing orange and red, and Cole didn't look back. Bapas. They rode hard for 2 hours before he let them slow, and by then they were past the first ridge and into the territory that Pike's men would need daylight and local knowledge to follow. Cole was reasonably confident they had neither. He pulled up in a stand of timber and they stopped, both of them breathing hard. The horses worse. Vivian looked at him. She had pine sap on her coat and snow in her hair and a look in her eyes that was somewhere between the aftermath of fear and something not entirely unlike exhilaration, though she'd probably have objected to that word. Your cabin, she said. Yeah. The lean-to, the east wall. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her processing the scale of it, everything he'd built, what they'd left behind. I'm sorry, she said. Stop apologizing, he said. Cole, I mean it. He looked at her. It's wood and stone. It can be rebuilt. He pulled his coat tighter against the cold. You can't. She held his gaze for a long moment in the dark. That's the most... She stopped, started again. You keep saying things that make it harder to stay at a reasonable distance from you, she said. He looked at her. Is that what you're doing? He said, staying at a reasonable distance. I've been trying to, she said. How's that working? She made a sound that was genuinely close to a laugh this time, short and slightly ragged from everything the last few hours had been, but real. Not well, she said. He leaned across the distance between the horses. He was clumsy about it. It was an awkward angle and there was a branch in the way that he didn't see until it caught his shoulder, and Vivian actually flinched back in surprise before she understood what he was doing. And then she didn't flinch back. It was brief and imperfect. And they were both cold, and the horses were impatient, and somewhere behind them, a man named Dorian Pike was probably reorganizing and furious. When he pulled back, she was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before, unguarded all the way down, nothing managing nothing, just her. Reasonable distance, he said. Shut up, she said, but without heat. He almost smiled. He was getting closer to it. Come on, he said, turning his horse. Long ride to Cheyenne. Diplomat. They made camp once before dawn, a cold camp in a hollow that blocked the wind but offered nothing else in the way of comfort. No fire. Fire meant location, and location was the one thing they couldn't afford to give away. They ate cold provisions from the saddlebag, sitting close enough to share warmth without discussing it as a choice. Cole was calculating the miles to Cheyenne and the state of the horses, and the realistic likelihood that Pike would pursue south versus east, when Vivian said, I need to tell you something. He looked at her. About the ledger, she said. There are names in it beyond Langford. Officials, 3 territorial judges, a marshal out of Denver, 2 senators. She paused. When this opens up, it's going to be bigger than one rich man. It's going to be... She shook her head slightly. It's going to pull on things that a lot of powerful people don't want pulled on. I know, he said. You know? I've been thinking about it since you told me what was in it, he said. Something that big doesn't stay quiet just because a judge opens an investigation. It becomes political. It becomes a fight. Yes, she said. It does. She looked at him. I want you to understand what you're in the middle of. You didn't sign up for this. I signed something in Silver Ridge in December, he said. That's close enough. She looked at the dark ground between them. A piece of paper doesn't obligate you to, but it's not the paper, he said. She went quiet. The wind moved through the hollow above them, and the horses shifted their weight, and somewhere on the far ridge something made a sound and fell silent. The night was fully dark now, moonless, the kind of dark that was oddly private. You're a strange man, Cole Barrett, she said finally. Probably, he said. I mean that as a compliment. I know, he said. Get some sleep. She leaned back against the hollow's earthen wall and pulled her coat around her, and he stayed awake watching the ridge and thinking about Cheyenne and a man named Samuel Briggs who might or might not be brave enough when it counted, and a federal judge who had refused a bribe 3 years ago and who now had 6 folded pages somewhere in the inside pocket of a mail rider's coat, moving south through the dark on a horse that didn't know what it was carrying. It was out there now. Whatever came next, the thing they'd been carrying between them for months, was out there in the world, moving towards something. Cole watched the ridge and let that be enough for tonight. They reached Cheyenne on the 3rd day, not cleanly. The last stretch of trail had given them 2 hours of freezing rain that turned the road into something closer to a river, and Cole's horse had pulled up lame on the final approach into town, forcing him to walk her the last 4 miles, while Vivian rode alongside at a pace that was too slow for either of their nerves. By the time Cheyenne's main street materialized through the gray afternoon drizzle, They were both soaked and saddle sore and running on the particular fuel that kicks in when adrenaline has been burned through and there's nothing left but stubbornness. They found a boarding house on the eastern edge of town, the kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as payment arrived before the questions did. Cole paid 2 nights in advance with the last of the money from the saddlebag reserve he'd sewn into the lining 2 winters ago for exactly the kind of emergency that had never happened until now. The room was small and cold and had a window that looked out onto a wall, which was actually ideal because a window with a view also had a view of you. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her wet boots and looked at the ceiling. "Briggs," she said. "Tomorrow," Cole said. "You need to sleep. I need to find him before he finds out we're here and disappears." Vivian: "You've been awake for the better part of 36 hours. So have you." "I'm used to it." She looked at him with an expression that communicated very efficiently what she thought of that answer. 4 hours, she said. Then we find him. He didn't argue. He sat in the room's one chair with his back to the wall where he could see both the door and the window, a habit so ingrained it wasn't a decision anymore, and he was asleep inside of 10 minutes. She let him sleep 5. Damn, Samuel Briggs was not hard to find. That was the first problem. A man who was afraid and had something to hide should have been harder to find. He should have been in a small office on a quiet street, operating under a different name, keeping his head down in the deliberate way of someone who understood they were exposed. Instead, Vivian found his name on a brass plate outside one of the larger commercial buildings on Cheyenne's main thoroughfare, Briggs & Associates, Land Management, 2nd floor, which told her one of 2 things. Either Samuel Briggs had decided the best place to hide was in plain sight, or Samuel Briggs had decided not to hide at all. She wasn't sure which possibility worried her more. Cole stood beside her on the boardwalk looking at the brass plate. "He's still working for Langford," Cole said. "I don't know that," she said. "A man cuts ties with Langford's operation. He doesn't put his own name on the door of a land management firm," Cole said. "He's still connected. Or he's trying to appear connected so no one looks at him too closely," she said. But even as she said it, she could hear how thin it sounded. "Only one way to know," Cole said. She straightened her coat, still damp at the collar, nothing to be done about it, and pushed through the door. The office was what the brass plate had promised. Respectable, organized, the kind of space designed to project reliability. A young clerk at the front desk looked up with the professional smile of someone paid to be pleasant. "Samuel Briggs," Vivian said. "Oh, tell him Vivian Mercer is here." The smile went uncertain at the edges. "Do you have an appointment?" "Tell him," she said. The clerk disappeared through an inner door. Cole stood beside Vivian with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the door and the window in equal measure. 30 seconds. A minute. The inner door opened. Samuel Briggs was 42, heavy-set in the way of a man who had once been solid and was now soft at the edges, with reading spectacles pushed up on his forehead and the look of someone who had just received information that rearranged everything he thought was true about his afternoon. He stopped in the doorway and looked at Vivian with an expression that went through surprise and relief and fear in about 2 seconds flat. "Vivian," he said, just her name, like it meant several things at once. "Samuel," she said, "we need to talk." He looked at Cole. "My husband," she said. "He stays." Briggs looked at Cole for a moment, clearly doing some kind of rapid internal calculation, and then he stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," he said. What? The inner office was small and private. Briggs closed the door and then stood with his back against it, which Cole noted was the position of a man who hadn't decided yet whether he wanted to be inside this room or outside it. "You're alive," Briggs said to Vivian. "Yes." "When you disappeared, I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "They told me you'd stolen documents, that you were a fugitive." "I did take documents," she said. "I took them because what they documented was criminal, and I was the only person who could prove it." Briggs was quiet for a moment. He walked to his desk and sat down in his chair, the way a man sits when his legs have made the decision before his mind has. He took off the spectacles from his forehead and turned them in his hands. "You know what you're asking," he said. Not a question. "I know what I'm asking," she said. "I have a wife," he said. 3 children. The youngest is 4 years old." He looked at the spectacles. I've thought about this every day for 2 years. Every single day. And every day I've told myself there's no version of this that ends well for my family. Samuel. Vivian leaned forward slightly. I've already sent the key records to a federal judge in Denver, Judge Kroll. He has enough to open an investigation. But an investigation without corroboration is something Langford's lawyers can delay for years. If you testify, not everything, just what you saw directly, it changes the timeline. It changes what Langford can bury and what he can't. Briggs said nothing. He's been buying time with his lawyers for 30 years, she said. The only thing that takes that away is multiple witnesses. I'm one. You're the other. We're the only two people alive who were inside that operation and can speak to what we saw. There may be others, Briggs said quietly. Probably, she said, but they don't know I'm here. You do. A long silence. Cole had been watching Briggs the way he watched animals that hadn't decided yet whether to run, looking for the thing underneath the obvious fear, the thing that was going to make the decision before the man knew he'd made it. And what he saw in Briggs, underneath the spectacles and the respectable office and the carefully maintained life, was something that looked a lot like the same grinding weight Vivian had been carrying for months. The particular exhaustion of a person who knows something that needs to be said and has been not saying it until the effort of not saying it has become its own kind of damage. Your children, Cole said. Briggs looked at him. You're worried about what happens to them if you testify, Cole said. But you've been in that office 2 years with Langford's name on everything you touch. When this breaks, and it's going to break because it's already moving, men who stayed silent get looked at the same way men who helped. You've been thinking about your family's future, so think about it all the way. Briggs stared at him. Who are you, Saul? He said. A man who builds things, Cole said, and I know that the only way to build something that holds is to get rid of the rot first, even when that's expensive. It was a long moment. The office was very quiet. Somewhere outside, Cheyenne went about its business, wagons and voices, and the ordinary noise of a town that didn't know what was happening in a small room above its main street. Briggs put his spectacles on the desk. I want protection, he said. Written, federal, before I say a single word to anyone. That's something Judge Kroll can provide, Vivian said. You'd have to get me to Denver. We're going to Denver, she said. Another silence. Give me an hour, Briggs said. I need to arrange things for my family. Tell them I'm traveling for business. He paused. I'm not lying to them. I am traveling for business, just not the kind they know about. Vivian looked at him. 1 hour, she said. Ba? They waited at the boarding house. Cole sat in the chair. Vivian sat on the edge of the bed. Neither of them slept this time. You think he'll come? Cole said. Not quite a question. I think he's been waiting for someone to make it possible, she said. He needed to know he wasn't alone in it. She paused. People can endure almost anything if they're not alone in it. Cole looked at her. She met his eyes, and something passed between them that didn't need to be said out loud and probably shouldn't have been. Not yet. Not here in a borrowed room in a town they were going to leave in an hour. When this is over, he said. When this is over, she agreed. Like a question with the same answer. Briggs knocked on his door at the 58-minute mark. He had a travel bag and a look on his face that was frightened and resolved in equal measure, which was exactly the right combination. Cowardice would have been worse than no testimony at all, and pure bravado wouldn't survive what was coming. This, the visible working fear of a man doing something he knows is going to cost him, this was the kind of thing that held up. All right, he said. Let's go. The road to Denver took 4 days. Not 3, which was the standard, because they had a lame horse and a man who wasn't used to hard travel and a route that Cole chose for concealment over efficiency. They went south through Laramie and then cut southeast on trails that weren't on any commercial map, staying off the main road where Pinkerton men were most likely to be watching. Cole ran scout. Vivian managed Briggs, who needed managing, not because he was weak, but because fear in a contained man tends to come out sideways, in sudden silences and sharp words, and an occasional paralysis that needed talking through. She was good at it. Patient in the way of someone who had talked herself through the same kind of fear for months and knew where the walls were. On the second night, camped in a hollow south of Laramie with a small fire that Cole had built with the smoke-minimizing technique of long practice, Briggs told them about the massacres. He'd only alluded to them before. Now, in the firelight, with 3 days of committed flight behind him and something unlocking in him because of it, he told them the full account. 3 frontier settlements, families who'd refused to sell their land for the rail expansion, men Langford had hired, not the Pinkerton kind, the other kind, who had gone in at night and made the refusals permanent, the records of payment, which Briggs had seen and which matched entries in Vivian's ledger that she'd marked without knowing exactly what they corresponded to. When he finished talking, the fire was low and nobody said anything for a while. "I should have gone to someone 2 years ago," Briggs said. His voice was flat with self-knowledge. "Yes," Vivian said. No softening, but no cruelty either. Just the truth, which was what he needed more than comfort. "I kept thinking someone else would," he said. "Everyone thinks that," she said. "It's how things like this stay buried." Cole added a piece of wood to the fire and watched it catch. "You're going now," he said. "That's what matters." Briggs looked at him. "You really believe that?" he said. "That it matters when? Not just whether." Cole thought about it honestly. "I believe the right thing done late is still the right thing," he said. "I also believe it would have been better earlier. Both of those are true." Briggs nodded slowly. He looked into the fire for a long time. "My daughter drew me a picture before I left," he said, not really to either of them. "Mountains. She'd never seen a mountain, just drew what she imagined they looked like." He paused. "I put it in my coat pocket." Nobody said anything to that. There was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish it. They arrived in Denver on a Thursday afternoon in late March, when the city was doing the uncertain business of transitioning between seasons. Snow still on the peaks visible from the main street, mud in the roads, and a quality of light that was starting to remember what warmth felt like. The federal courthouse was a solid sandstone building on the east side of the city, the kind of architecture that was meant to convey permanence and authority and mostly succeeded. Cole walked in with Vivian on one side and Briggs on the other, and the clerk at the receiving desk looked up at 3 travel-worn people who didn't look like the kind of people who typically walked into federal courthouses and didn't say anything, because the look on all 3 faces communicated that this wasn't a conversation he was going to talk them out of. "Judge Krall," Vivian said. "We sent documentation ahead. My name is Vivian Mercer." The clerk went somewhere. They waited. Emmett Krall was 61, with white hair and the build of a man who had been large once, and had compressed rather than diminished with age. He came out of the inner corridor with the sealed oilskin packet in his hand. Cade had delivered it. It had arrived, something that Cole had been holding as an open question until this moment. And he looked at the 3 of them with an expression that was measuring and careful and completely without the performative authority that lesser men used the bench to produce. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "Judge Krall," she said. He looked at the packet in his hand. "I've read this twice," he said. "Come in." What happened in Krall's office over the next 3 hours was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was document review and testimony and the careful procedural work of a legal mind building a structure that would hold under pressure. Krall asked precise questions. Vivian answered them precisely. Briggs answered his with the shaking hands and steady voice of a man who had committed to something and was going to see it through regardless of how his body felt about it. Cole sat in a chair against the wall and said nothing, because nothing he had to say was relevant to this particular process, and irrelevant contributions to legal proceedings were one of the many things he had no patience for. At one point, Krall looked up from his notes and looked at Cole directly. "You're the husband," he said. "Yes," Cole said. "You're aware this woman is the subject of a Pinkerton commission?" "Yes." "And you transported her across 2 territories while being pursued?" "Yes." Krall held his gaze for a moment. "All right," he said, and went back to his notes. By the time they left the courthouse, the sun was going down over the mountains, and Krall had issued 3 things: a federal protective order covering both Vivian and Briggs, a subpoena for the original ledger which Vivian arranged to have retrieved from its hiding place via sealed instructions to Sheriff Aldous in Silver Ridge, and the beginning of what he called, in the measured language of a man who didn't make promises he couldn't keep, a significant federal inquiry. On the courthouse steps, Briggs stood for a moment in the late afternoon light with his travel bag at his feet and his spectacles on his nose, and the look of a man who had just put something down that he'd been carrying for a very long time and wasn't entirely sure how to stand without the weight of it. "What do you do now?" Vivian asked him. "Go home," he said. "Tell my wife the truth, all of it." A pause. "I should have done that too." "Yes," she said. "But you're doing it now." He looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner," he said. "I'm sorry you had to carry it alone." Vivian held his gaze. "You're here now," she said. "That's the whole of it." Briggs picked up his bag and walked toward the livery to arrange his passage home, and Vivian watched him go, and Cole stood beside her and watched the city light going gold and amber across the sandstone building behind them. "It's out of our hands now," she said. "Yes," he said. "That's a strange feeling." "Yeah," he said. "It is." What happened next happened without them, which was both the point and the hardest part. They stayed in Denver 3 weeks because Kroll needed them available for follow-up testimony, and because the federal protective order was meaningless if they wandered back into territory where Pinkerton commissions had more practical authority than federal paper. They rented 2 rooms in a respectable hotel. Vivian insisted on 2 rooms, and Cole didn't argue, because there were things between them that deserved to be arrived at properly and not under the compressed pressure of crisis and shared danger. It was the strangest 3 weeks Cole Barrett had ever spent. He was in a city, which he hated. He was waiting, which he hated more. He had nothing practical to do with his hands, which was the particular torture of a man whose entire identity was built around solving physical problems in physical space. He bought tools he didn't need from a hardware store and sharpened them in his hotel room. He walked the city in the early mornings the way he'd walked trap lines, mapping it by instinct even though the mapping was useless. And in the evenings, he had dinner with Vivian. Just that. Dinner in the hotel dining room, which was more formal than anything either of them was comfortable with, at a table by the window where she ordered coffee without sugar, and he ordered the plainest thing on the menu, and they talked. Really talked. Not the functional exchange of information that had characterized their first months together. Not the careful navigation around the things they weren't ready to say. Actual conversation, the kind where you tell someone who you were before you were who you are now, and they tell you back. She told him about Philadelphia, about a father who'd been a clerk his whole life, and a mother who'd wanted something bigger for her daughter, and a childhood spent understanding that precision and accuracy were the only reliable currencies available to a woman without inheritance or connection. About discovering she was genuinely good with numbers, not in the mechanical way, but in the way of actually seeing the story that numbers told, the shape of a thing underneath its accounting. He told her about the mountains, about coming west at 19 with $30 and bad information, and the specific humbling experience of discovering that everything he thought he knew about wilderness survival was wrong, and the slower, harder process of learning what was actually true. About the first winter he'd nearly died, and the second winter he'd almost not minded dying, and the third winter something had shifted and he'd understood, in a way he couldn't entirely articulate, that this was where he was supposed to be. "You never wanted to go back east?" she said one evening. "No," he said. "Did you want to stay?" She thought about it. "I wanted to matter," she said. "I thought that was a city thing. I thought you had to be somewhere people could see you." She looked at her coffee cup. "I don't think that anymore." "What do you think now?" She looked up at him. "I think mattering is smaller than that," she said. "More specific. One person, one place, one thing done right." A pause. "I think I got confused about the scale." Cole said nothing. But he thought about a woman who had arrived on a winter platform with nothing but a ruined dress and a bag with a secret in it, and had, over the course of one brutal mountain winter, learned to shoot and split wood and read the weather and face a wolf pack alone in the dark, and who was sitting across from him now in a hotel dining room in Denver, talking about the scale of mattering. He thought, "I am entirely in love with this woman, and I have been for longer than I want to admit." He didn't say it, not yet. He wasn't built for the kind of declaration that announced itself before it had earned the right. But the thought was there, solid and clear, and without the complicated ambivalence that had characterized everything he'd felt since December. It was simply true. The news broke on a Tuesday in the 4th week of April. Cole read it in the morning paper over breakfast in the hotel lobby, which was a surreal experience for a man who had not read a newspaper regularly since before the first Cleveland administration. The headline was restrained in the way of serious journalism. Not breathless, not triumphant, just the plain and devastating statement of fact. Langford Railroad interests, subject to federal fraud investigation, multiple indictments expected. He bought a second copy and went upstairs. Vivian was already dressed, already holding the paper she'd gotten from the hall boy. They looked at each other. "It's real," she said. The two words carried the weight of everything it had cost to make them true. "It's real," he said. She sat down on the edge of the bed, not dramatically, just the physical acknowledgement of something that had been held taut for so long that its release required a moment of stillness. She looked at the paper in her hands and then set it on the bed beside her and looked at the wall. 3 years, she said. 2 years knowing. 1 year running. She paused. I kept thinking it was going to disappear, that his lawyers would find a way to make it disappear. "They're trying," Cole said. "It says here they've filed 4 motions already." "They'll file 40, she said. "That's what they do. But Crawl won't move." A pause. "He's the right kind of stubborn." Cole stood in the doorway of her hotel room, looking at her sitting on the bed with the morning light coming through the window, and the newspaper beside her, and 3 years of fear starting, finally, to let go its grip on her face. He crossed the room and sat beside her. She leaned into him, not the tired, involuntary lean from the wagon ride back in March, but a deliberate thing, a choice made consciously in the ordinary morning light. "What do we do now?" she said. "Whatever we want," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't entirely know what that looks like," she said. "I've been operating on emergency for so long." "I know," he said. "Me too." She turned to look at him. "Me too?" she said. "You seemed calm," he said. "I know. Calm isn't the same thing as not afraid." She looked at him for a long moment. "What were you afraid of?" she said. He held her gaze. "That I'd get you through it, and then you'd go back to Philadelphia," he said. "Or anywhere. That you'd be safe, and I'd go back to the mountain alone, and that would be the end of it." She looked at him with the unguarded expression he'd first seen outside Cheyenne, and that he now understood was simply her face when she stopped managing it. "I'm not going back to Philadelphia," she said. "No?" he said. "No," she said. "I went west, Cole. I'm not built for going back." He kissed her then, properly this time, without an inconvenient branch and without horses between them and without the immediate pressure of armed men in the tree line. Just the two of them in a hotel room in Denver on a Tuesday morning with a newspaper on the bed and the particular quality of light that comes in April, when the season is finally committed to the decision to change. It was still imperfect. He was out of practice and she was nervous, and they bumped foreheads first, which made her laugh. A real laugh, the full version, something he'd been waiting months to hear. And then it was better. 3 weeks later, Vivian received a formal letter from the federal attorney's office advising that all charges and Pinkerton commissions related to the Langford matter had been suspended pending investigation, and that she was free to travel and reside without restriction. The letter was followed 2 days later by a second, more private letter from Judge Crawl himself, which informed her that Samuel Briggs' testimony had been pivotal, that 3 other former Langford employees had come forward in the weeks following the initial indictments, and that the case was, in his estimation, substantial enough to survive any legal delay Langford's team could manufacture. Victor Langford, the letter noted without editorializing, had been removed from his directorship at the railroad holding company by his own board of investors, who had apparently calculated that distance was their best remaining asset. Vivian read both letters at the small desk in her hotel room, and then folded them carefully and put them in the inside pocket of her coat, next to where the notebook used to sit before she'd stopped needing to write in it every night. She went to find Cole. He was in the hotel's small courtyard, of all places, sitting on a bench with a piece of wood and a knife, carving something that didn't have a clear shape yet. He looked up when she came out. She handed him the letters without saying anything. He read them. She watched his face while he read, the stillness of it, the slight shift around his eyes at the Briggs line. He folded the letters and handed them back. "It's done," she said. The investigation isn't done, he said. No, but we are. She paused. Our part. He looked at her for a moment. Are you all right? He said. She thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved. I don't know what all right feels like anymore, she said. I've been braced for something for so long that not bracing feels wrong, like I'm forgetting something. She paused. Is that normal? Don't know, he said. Never been through something like this. You've been through plenty of hard things. Different kind of hard, he said. Mountain hard is simpler. The danger is clear. You deal with it or you don't. This was never clear, she said. No, he said. It wasn't. She sat beside him on the bench. He went back to the carving. She watched his hands work, those particular hands, calloused and competent, that had taught her to shoot and adjusted a lamp for better light and held her steady on a dark trail when the footing was wrong. I want to go back to the mountain, she said. He stopped carving. Not the same homestead, she said quickly. I know the cabin, the lean-to. She'd thought about this carefully. But the mountain itself, the high country, I want to go back. He looked at her. Why? He said. It was a genuine question, not a challenge, and she gave it the genuine answer it deserved. Because that's where I became something I recognize, she said. Not who I was in Philadelphia, not who I was when I was running. Something else, something that feels more like the actual truth of me. She paused. And because you're there, or you should be, and I'd like to be where you are. Cole Barrett looked at the piece of wood in his hands. He was not a man given to sentiment, which was different from saying he didn't feel things. He felt them. He just didn't trust that feeling them out loud made them more real, because in his experience things were most real when they were built with your hands and tested by weather, and still standing after the testing. Words were approximations. Actions were the actual statement, which was why what he did next was the most articulate thing he'd said in months. He put the carving in his coat pocket and stood up. Come on, he said. Let's go find out what lumber costs in this city. She looked up at him. You want to buy lumber, she said. I want to start calculating what we need, he said. Stone for the foundation, timber for the frame. The lean-to needs to be bigger this time. If you're going to be working in it, it needs proper light. She stood up slowly. You're planning the new cabin, she said. I'm planning our cabin, he said. Different thing. Something moved through her face. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said, she said. It's a structural discussion, he said. Coal. There's a practical dimension to everything, he said, but the corner of his mouth moved. She put her hand through his arm the way people did it in cities, which he found slightly awkward, and they walked out of the courtyard together and into the Denver street, and for the first time in a very long time, neither of them was watching for someone behind them. They left Denver in early May. The road north was muddy with snowmelt and loud with birds that had returned from wherever birds went in winter, and the horses were fresh and the sky was the particular shade of blue that only happens at altitude in spring, the kind that looks almost artificial, too saturated to be real. Vivian rode beside him on the trail back through Cheyenne, not behind, not ahead. Beside, as it had been since somewhere on the long trail from the mountain in March, when the arrangement had quietly and without announcement become permanent. They stopped in Cheyenne overnight, and she sent a letter to Briggs's home address. Not long. A page. Maybe less. He didn't read it. She sealed it herself. But she told him what she'd written, that she was grateful, that she hoped his family was well, that she thought he'd done a hard thing correctly, and that counted for more than the timing. Do you think he'll be all right? Cole said, when she came back from the post office. I think he has a 4-year-old who drew him mountains, she said. He'll figure out how to be all right. In Silver Ridge, Sheriff Aldis met them at the edge of town with a look that was partly relief and partly the expression of a man who had been holding several things together by will alone and was grateful to hand them off. Ledger's in federal custody, he said. Crawl's man came through 2 weeks ago. A pause. Pike hasn't been back. He won't be, Cole said. Aldis looked at Vivian. You doing all right, Mrs. Barrett? He said. Yes, she said. Thank you for not talking. I'm a slow man, Aldis said, which was the closest thing to a joke the sheriff had managed in possibly years, and they left him to it. Gerald at the post office went extremely red when he saw Vivian and said he was sorry about 6 times before she told him firmly that it was all right and he hadn't known, and she didn't hold it against him. This seemed to distress him more than the original guilt, but they left him to manage it. Hatch at the general store sold them 6 months of provisions without asking a single question, which was the highest form of respect he knew how to show. They went up the mountain on a Wednesday morning in the second week of May, with 2 pack horses carrying lumber and the riding horses carrying everything else, and the trail was different from December in every way except the vertical. Green pushing through where the snow had retreated, streams running fast with melt, mud and ruts where the frozen ground had given way. It was harder than winter riding in some ways, softer footing, less predictable. But the light was different, more of it, and warmer. And it came through the pines at angles that winter never allowed. The clearing looked smaller than Cole remembered. That always happened after time away. Spaces contracted in memory without the actual dimensions changing. He stopped the horses at the tree line and looked at it. The cabin was partially standing. The east wall was gone entirely where the blasting powder had done its work, and the lean-to was ash and scorched earth, and the roof had partially collapsed where the structural support had failed. But the west wall and the stone fireplace were intact, and the root cellar had survived completely, and the granite shelf behind the property was exactly as it had always been, indifferent and permanent. Vivian stopped her horse beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "It's worse than I expected," she said. "It's better than starting from nothing," he said. "Is it?" "The foundation's good," he said. "The fireplace is good. The root cellar is good." He looked at it. "I built those first because I knew everything else could be rebuilt. The first things you build to last." She looked at the ruins for a moment. "What do we start with?" she said. "Clear the debris," he said. "Then assess the standing walls. Then frame the new sections." He paused. "It'll take most of the summer." "All right," she said. "It's hard work," he said. "Harder than winter chores." "I know what hard work is," she said. "I know you do," he said. They rode into the clearing. Bob. The summer was exactly as hard as Cole had said, and neither of them had romanticized it, which was probably why they survived it with their sanity and their relationship more or less intact. There were days when the work was grinding and progress felt invisible, and they were both too tired and too sore for conversation. And on those days, they ate in near silence and slept early and started again in the morning. There were also days when something fit together correctly. A beam seated in its joint, a wall rising plumb and solid, the roof taking shape against the sky, and the satisfaction of that was clean and deep and worth everything the bad days cost. Vivian built the lean-to. Not alone, Cole helped with the framing, but the decisions were hers, bigger than before, with a south-facing window that she'd specifically requested, and a proper workbench with a lamp bracket that put the light exactly where she needed it. She was going to keep the homestead accounts. Real ones, formal ones, because a working property needed proper accounting, and she was going to have a space to do it that wasn't also the kitchen. Cole built the bedroom last, not as an afterthought, as a deliberate choice, the way you save a thing until you've earned it. He built it into the west end of the cabin with 2 windows instead of 1, and walls thick enough to hold the heat and a floor that was level, which required more work than it might have because the ground under the west end had a slight grade that he'd been compensating for since the original build. When it was finished in early September with the aspens already going gold on the lower slopes and the first morning frost appearing on the water barrel, he showed it to her. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. It was plain. That was simply true. No decoration, no elegance, nothing that would have looked at home in Philadelphia. Just good solid wood and a straight floor and 2 windows, and enough space for 2 people to exist without diminishing each other. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's functional," he said. "Cole," she said, turning to look at him. "Learn to accept a compliment." "It's functional and it'll hold," he said. "That's what matters. That's what you always say. Because it's always true." She looked at him for a moment, that direct, unguarded look that he'd stopped being surprised by and started depending on without fully noticing the transition. "It's beautiful," she said again. "Both things can be true." He looked at the room, at the windows, and the level floor and the walls that would hold. "Yeah," he said. "I guess they can." There are things that don't resolve cleanly, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Victor Langford's legal proceedings ran for years, the kind of thing that generates its own ecosystem of lawyers and motions and counter-motions and appeals, the machinery of powerful men trying to preserve what remains of their power. He was eventually convicted on 11 counts of fraud and conspiracy, and the 3 territorial judges named in Vivian's ledger resigned before indictments could be issued, which was a form of accountability that felt insufficient and was probably the best available. 2 of the settlements that had been destroyed were rebuilt with compensation ordered by the federal court. One wasn't, because the families had scattered too far and the will to reconstruct wasn't there anymore, and that stayed a loss regardless of what the court ordered. Samuel Briggs testified twice. He kept his family together. His daughter grew up and eventually went to school in Denver, and he sent Vivian a letter about it that she kept in the notebook she'd started using again, for different reasons now. Dorian Pike took a different commission the following spring. Cole heard about it from Aldous without seeking the information, and he thought about the man with the city hat and the careful authority, and concluded that Pike had simply been doing a job the way he understood it, and that understanding and right weren't always the same thing, and left it at that. Sheriff Aldous was re-elected. Gerald at the post office stopped blinking quite so fast. Hatch at the general store overcharged them for coffee for 3 years running before Vivian caught the error in the receipts and corrected him, which he received with the look of a man who had expected nothing less. What Cole and Vivian built on that mountain was not a legend, despite what people in Silver Ridge would later say about it. It was a homestead. A working, difficult, imperfect homestead that required constant attention and regular repair and produced exactly enough to live on in good years and required careful management in bad ones. They had arguments. Real ones. Not the polite friction of 2 people managing proximity, but the actual disagreements of 2 people with strong characters trying to share a life. About the accounts, which Vivian kept with a thoroughness Cole sometimes found excessive and which she found completely necessary. About his habit of disappearing into the mountains for days without adequate notice, which she tolerated but did not pretend to be comfortable with. About 100 small things that accumulated over seasons and required the ongoing maintenance of 2 people who had decided that the work of it was worth doing. Most of the time they concluded it was. There was an evening in their second year, late fall, with the first heavy snow of the season coming down outside, and the fire doing what fires do and the cabin warm and solid around them, when Vivian looked up from the accounts and said, without particular preamble, "I'm glad I refused to get back on that train." Cole looked up from the trap he was mending. "Yeah?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I was terrified. I didn't have a real plan. I was mostly just... I couldn't think of anywhere else to go." "I know," he said. "You knew then?" "I knew you were scared," he said. "I didn't know if you'd make it." "Did you think I would?" He considered the question honestly, the way he considered all her questions. "I thought you had the kind of scared that makes people fight," he said, "which is different from the kind that makes them freeze." A pause. "I was right." She looked at him across the table. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me," she said. "I told you the cabin was beautiful," he said. "You said it was functional." "Same thing," he said. She laughed, the full version, the one he'd waited months to hear in that hotel room in Denver and had been hearing regularly ever since. It still had the same quality, unguarded, real, the sound of someone who had come far enough from fear that joy was available again. He went back to the trap. Outside, the snow came down on the mountain the way it always had and always would, without asking permission, without caring about the plans of the small, warm things living beneath it. The aspens had already lost their gold. The high peaks were white down to the middle elevation. In 6 weeks, the world above the tree line would be locked again in the particular silence of deep winter. The silence that Cole had been living in alone for years before a train arrived 40 minutes late, and a woman in a torn velvet dress refused to get back on it. He thought about that sometimes, about the chain of it. One letter written on a bad night, one response from a desperate woman, one refusal on an icy platform that had changed the whole trajectory of both their lives. He thought about how close it had come to going differently, how many moments there had been. The first storm, the wolf pack, the poster in Silver Ridge, The explosion and the flight and the cold camp south of Laramie. With a wrong decision, the slightly slower response, the moment of doubt that lasted 1 second too long, would have produced a completely different ending. He had made peace with not knowing why it had gone the way it did. He wasn't a man who needed the universe to explain itself to him. He just needed it to hold together long enough for the work to be done. Vivian looked up from her accounts and found him looking at her and gave him the look that meant, "What?" In the shorthand they'd developed over 2 years of sharing space, he shook his head slightly. Nothing. Never mind. She went back to her numbers. He went back to his trap. The fire worked. The snow fell on the mountain outside, indifferent as always, and inside the cabin that two people had built from ash and stubbornness, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself until it's already become the foundation everything else rests on. The warmth held. It was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough.